Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. A voice narrates the beginning of the events, stating that 400 years prior, their God had taken them out of the land of slavery and placed them in a promised land to their fathers, where they prospered and were happy. However, after some time, the same people who were liberated, the Hebrews, turned their backs on their God, who had freed them from evil, and by this act they were left alone, unprotected, and divided. As a result, their enemies called the Philistines came, subdued them, and made them slaves, committing all sorts of wickedness against them. Their only hope now was a prophecy that a man would be born who would be capable of delivering them from that oppression. In Gaza at that time, the Philistines worshipped their pagan god called Dagon, offering him many things and compelling the Hebrews to do the same to exalt Dagon, claiming that the Hebrews had abandoned their god to serve him now. Meanwhile, a man named Caleb descended by a rope to enter the storeroom of offerings to retrieve food, all of which, incidentally, was cultivated by the Hebrews. They were now obligated to give everything they produced to the Philistines, retaining only what they needed to avoid starving. Holding the rope was Samson, Caleb's older brother, the man whose birth was a promise from the living God, the God of his Hebrew people who, despite being rejected in the past, was now acting to set them free. Samson possessed an unusual strength among men but had not yet fully understood his mission on earth. While pulling his brother back up to collect more food, a Philistine soldier saw him and demanded that he reveal his identity and explain what he was doing there. Unable to hide his face any longer, as he was already quite well known due to his great strength, he revealed himself. When the soldiers advanced to capture him, he effortlessly threw a cart at them, toppling them all. He then leaped into the storeroom and saved his brother, who was in trouble with another soldier inside. They mingled among the people in the temple to attempt an escape, but when they were spotted, Samson easily overpowered another soldier and took the coins that were in the offering box for the pagan god, tossing them to his people who were there under duress, causing a great commotion. They ran outside and attempted to escape while carrying sacks full of food, with furious soldiers in pursuit. However, Samson, cornered, had to fight and once again easily defeated the soldiers who attacked him. Samson had a great weakness for female beauty and, seeing some girls who were watching everything, he began to chat happily and distractedly with them. Soon, more and more soldiers arrived, and he had to keep running. Further ahead, he met his brother again, who was in disguise, and the two of them continued running together. Finally, they reached the city gates and managed to escape. Meanwhile, in the tribe of Dan, where Samson lived, the people were required to give everything they had as taxes to the Philistines. Other soldiers went from house to house oppressing the residents whom they suspected of hiding food from the tributes. In the line for the payment of such injustice were also Samson's parents, Manoah and his wife. Overseeing the tax collection was the Philistine prince named Rala, cruel and merciless. At one point, a poor man who was in line approached him, begging for mercy, asking that they at least leave a little so that they would not suffer as much from hunger as they were. However, heartless and cruel as he was, Rala ordered the poor man to be killed. Hours later, Samson arrived home and was informed by his parents about the death of the poor man. His father then reminded Samson of his calling, that he had been given the mission to free and avenge his people from all the oppression by the Philistine people. However, Samson did not show any willingness to take on that responsibility, claiming that he had done everything God required of him, one of which was never to cut his hair, and his mother told him never to forget who he was. That night, in the Philistine palace, Rala spoke with his father named Balak. After reporting on the successful tax collection that day, Rala discusses rumors of a very strong Hebrew who the people believe to be their savior, but he dismisses it as a mere slave's tale. However, Balak takes this seriously and orders him to investigate the story thoroughly. One day, while Samson and his brother are carrying a load of wheat, two men, one helping the other to walk, talk to Samson about a fight being organized by the Philistines against the Hebrews, with money at stake. They mention that their fighter is a giant from Egypt who humiliates and mocks the God of the Hebrews. Samson immediately decides to go see this fight. Upon arriving, he witnesses the giant fighter who defeats everyone, while simultaneously exalting their pagan god, claiming that the God of the Hebrews is weak, just like the Hebrew people themselves. Organizing the fight is Ahar and his daughter named Taran. Samson wants to confront the Philistine fighter right away, but his brother warns that something seems off, and it could be a trap. However, strongly driven to seek justice, Samson descends and presents himself for the fight. However, before the fight can begin, Samson sees Taryn among the spectators and fixates on her, taking a direct punch to the face as a result. He quickly gets up but takes more blows. Speaking with God, he rises once more and declares his name as Samson, serving the living God. The fighter attempts to strike him again, but Samson easily blocks it and, with just 2 blows, leaves the fighter lying on the ground. He then picks up a huge stone and prepares to throw it at the fallen fighter, but Ahar stops him by giving him the betting money, and Samson celebrates with his people. Among the crowd, Rala, the king's son, is also present, observing the entire fight, and when it concludes, he departs. It is later revealed that Rala himself arranged and set up that fight with Taryn's father to discover who Samson was. He kills the defeated fighter and informs Taryn and her father that they will now serve him to repay the debt they incurred from losing the fight. Later, in the palace, Rala informs his father about Samson, stating that the rumors were true because he saw Samson effortlessly lift a stone the size of a bull. He believes that the God of the Hebrews is undoubtedly with him. However, his father tells him that gods are just symbols and that Samson must be eliminated soon to avoid becoming a future problem. Meanwhile, Samson is admiring some girls from his people from a distance when his brother arrives and informs him that he knows who the girl Samson was looking at before the fight was. She is Taryn and is now serving Rala in Gaza. Armed with this information, Samson decides to go after her to set her free, and he asks his brother not to tell their parents anything. He soon manages to find her and observes her from afar. However, at one point, he approaches her and introduces himself, confessing that he couldn't stop thinking about her since he saw her on the day of the fight. But before they can talk further, she has to leave due to the prince's summons. However, before she leaves, Samson asks her to meet him the next day at a location at sunrise. The next day, they meet at the designated spot, and after sharing a bit about their backgrounds, they share a kiss. As the days pass, they enter into a serious relationship, and one day, Samson proposes to her, which she readily accepts. However, she is concerned that Samson's parents may not approve of their union because she is a Philistine. Still, Samson assures her that he will do everything to convince his parents to give their blessings for their marriage. One day, while Samson is relaxing with his parents, he informs them about his relationship with Taryn and his intention to marry her. However, his parents immediately object, stating that it is not right because she is a Philistine, and this would dishonor their people since the Philistines are their enemies. Samson, angered by his parents' response, leaves their presence and goes into the forest. There, he prays to God, asking for a sign if he is truly meant to be the leader of the Hebrew people. It's then that Samson notices a large lion passing nearby. He tries to move without being noticed by the fierce beast but accidentally makes a noise, alerting the lion, which charges toward him. Armed with nothing but his bare hands, Samson tries to defend himself and, with superhuman strength, easily manages to stop the lion's attack. Not only that, but he also effortlessly breaks the lion's jaw, killing it and saving himself from certain death. He then thanks God for this miraculous deliverance. Meanwhile, in the Philistine palace, Taryn is making her mistress's bed. Her mistress, who is engaged to Rala, is named Delilah. She arrives and finds Taryn happily humming to herself, so she asks the reason for her joy. Taryn reveals that she is in love with a man, who however, is not a Philistine but a Hebrew. Delilah then asks who this man is, and upon discovering that it's Samson, she says she will ask the prince to allow their marriage, having some plan in mind. That night, before going to sleep, Delilah talks to Rala about Samson and Taryn, suggesting that he should allow the marriage of the two so that Samson would never dare to raise his hand against the prince. She mentions that Samson has gained great fame and is already feared by the Philistines. Rala agrees with the idea, and it's evident that Delilah doesn't like him. Several days later, Samson passes by the place where he killed the lion with his bare hands. However, he notices that in the carcass of the animal, there is a swarm of bees, and he takes a honeycomb to eat. Reflecting on this, he creates a riddle about the situation: out of the eater, something to eat; out of the strong, something sweet. Sometime later, the day of Samson's wedding to Taryn arrives. The celebration includes both Hebrews and Philistines, and Rala and his fiancée Delilah are also in attendance. Apparently, Rala has been trying to get along with Samson because he fears Samson's superhuman strength. However, on that night, Rala attempts to trick Samson into drinking wine, but Samson refuses as he is committed to his vow to God never to drink wine. Rala then tries to belittle Samson, questioning if he has anything in his head besides his strength. Samson then poses a riddle to them, betting that if the Philistines are unable to solve it, they must give him 30 pieces of clothing, and he will do the same if they win. The riddle is the same one he created about the lion he killed, and he gives them until the following morning to answer it. After everyone resumes celebrating, Rala takes Taran aside and threatens her to find out the answer to the riddle, as he refuses to be outsmarted by Samson. He forces her to discover the answer and reveal it, otherwise, he would kill her father. Later, Taran attempts to extract the answer to the riddle from Samson, who eventually reveals it to her, but unbeknownst to them, Delilah overhears their conversation. The next morning, Samson confidently goes to learn the Philistines' answer to the riddle, but to his unhappy surprise, Rala answers correctly, as he had been told the right answer. Samson, unable to fulfill his end of the bet, is threatened by Rala, who demands the payment, and Samson agrees to provide it. He then rushes off to get the garments. Samson runs a considerable distance and, at one point, stops at the edge of a well to drink some water. Unbeknownst to him, there is a troop of Philistine soldiers and some of their prisoners, women who insult him, warning him not to drink that water. Ignoring their warnings, Samson decides to take their garments to fulfill his bet. With a single blow, he kills the leader of the soldiers and then easily defeats all the others with his bare fists before taking their clothes. Returning to where Rala and his men are, he throws the garments on the ground, declaring that the bet is paid and demanding to know where his wife is. However, Rala claims that she is not his wife but his slave, stating that Samson arrived too late to complete the wedding ceremony according to Philistine laws. Furthermore, he asserts that Samson has killed his soldiers, making him a slave for life. Samson leaves the scene in disarray, and Rala orders his men to go after him. Samson arrives at a ravine and spots several foxes inside a rock den. He gets an idea. That night, he captures the foxes, ties bundles of straw to their tails, and releases them into the Philistines' wheat fields, causing a rapid spread of fire. Rala sees the fire from the wall, and Samson appears in the distance, demanding his wife. However, Rala seizes Taran along with her father and throws them from the wall to their deaths. Samson is devastated, and the next day, he mourns in a cave known only to him and his brother. There, he drinks wine and breaks his vows to God. Meanwhile, the Philistines arrive at his village searching for him. To find him, they capture his father, Manoah. Samson's brother informs the Philistines of his whereabouts, and he goes to find Samson, who is still grieving. He attempts to persuade his brother to form an army with the Hebrews and fight together. However, Samson is despondent and has given up on everything, claiming that he has broken his vows to God. His brother informs him that their father was captured by Rala when a group of men from their tribe came to fetch Samson at Rala's demand, otherwise, their village would be destroyed. Samson, feeling hopeless, surrenders without resistance. Upon arriving where Rala and his father are, Samson is put with his head on the chopping block for execution. However, before the execution, Rala whispers in Samson's ear that he will still destroy the village after killing him, and his father will be killed first. He then orders the executioner to kill Samson's father, and it is done. In a fit of rage and grief, Samson easily breaks free from the ropes that bound him and kills his executioner. Rala, seeing this, orders all his men to attack, and he himself charges at Samson. Samson then grabs a donkey's jawbone from the ground and strikes Rala in the face with it. Samson asks God for strength, and the soldiers charge at him with everything they have. However, Samson defeats them effortlessly, including the Philistine general. Rala then orders more and more soldiers to come, and they keep arriving continuously. Samson, furious and thirsting for justice, faces them and defeats them as they come. At one point, dozens of men pile on top of Samson, who prays to God for strength. With renewed power, Samson rises and throws all the men off him. More and more soldiers keep arriving, and the battle continues throughout the afternoon. When the last soldier is defeated by Samson, he finds himself on top of a huge pile of bodies. At that moment, the foolish prince tries to attack him and receives his due punishment. Exhausted and thirsty, Samson falls to his knees. He sees water miraculously springing from the ground, a gift from God. He thanks God for the great victory that day and observes from a distance as all his enemies lie defeated on the ground. From that point on, Samson fully understands his purpose as the liberator of his people and accepts the role of a great leader of the Hebrews. He is anointed for this position. Returning to the battlefield, other soldiers are collecting the bodies of the fallen soldiers, and among them is Rala, who is still alive. After his wounds are treated, he tells his father that Samson has the strength of a god, as he saw it with his own eyes. However, the king is angered by this word and says that if Samson bleeds, it's because he is only a man, not a god. He orders Rala to tell the Hebrews that they will not retaliate if Samson swears to stop the violence, knowing they cannot defeat him. Furious with his father and everything else, Rala breaks the clay idol of his god Dagon in his room, declaring that he does not fear it. He claims to have seen a true god and a true man in his fight with Samson, emphasizing the real power, and vows to take that power from Samson, stating that Delilah will help him. Several years pass, during which the king did not send any soldiers after Samson, but they continued to collect oppressive tributes from the Hebrew people. Prince Rala was sent west to command troops against Egypt, where he stayed for many years as punishment. However, upon his return years later, the Hebrew people once again suffered from his violence and ruthlessness. Samson's advisors suggest that they gather men and go to war, but Samson refuses, saying that they need peace. He decides to personally speak with the king to end the oppression, or else he will not return. Upon arriving at the palace, he reunites with Rala, who then leaves, leaving Samson alone with the king. Samson tries to negotiate, suggesting that the Philistines stop oppressing the Hebrew people in exchange for peace. The king, however, mocks and denies the request, stating that if Samson truly wants his people to live in peace, he must disappear from among them. Samson, not wanting a war to break out, ponders this. Outside, he tells the man accompanying him to inform everyone that he will only return once he convinces the king. While walking the city streets, a woman offers him lodging for the night. As they talk, Delilah observes them from hiding, following someone's orders, presumably Rala. While Samson meditates, Delilah appears and tells him she's there to help him, claiming she is no longer with Rala since she saw his wickedness. Several soldiers suddenly arrive to apprehend Samson and the innkeeper. They flee, and Samson urges Delilah to escape because they only want him. Samson runs through the streets but is eventually cornered at the city gates with no way out. Archers positioned above the gate shoot arrows at him, but Samson prays to God for strength. His prayer is answered, and he tears the gates from their hinges with his bare arms, carrying them on his back to the top of a mountain to display the power of his God to the Philistines. Due to his injuries from the arrows, he collapses on a road, which Delilah happens to be passing by. She takes him to her home and tends to his wounds. 2 days later, Samson is completely healed, and he informs Delilah that he must leave. Delilah insists he stays, but Samson thanks her and departs. Back at his home, he asks his mother to intercede for him with God because he doesn't know what to do. Later, Caleb and a few other men, intending to prepare for war against the Philistines, visit Samson. However, Samson says he won't lead a war in which his people will die. He recalls what the Philistine king proposed and decides to go to Delilah's house to disappear from his people's lives, hoping the king will leave him in peace, as promised. Samson spends some time living with Delilah, and they even begin to live as a couple. One day, however, Rala finds Delilah and asks her what she has discovered about Samson and his strength. Delilah responds that Samson doesn't want war, he only wants his people to live well, and pleads with Rala to leave him in peace. Rala threatens her and compels her to fulfill their agreement, leaving her frightened. One day, while Delilah is cooking, she appears upset with Samson, accusing him of keeping secrets from her. After much insistence, Samson reveals to Delilah his 3 vows to God, with 2 already broken. The only remaining vow is never to cut his hair, and he fears that if it's broken, he will lose all his strength. That night, Delilah prepares a sedative and gives it to Samson. Once he falls into a deep sleep, she cuts his hair. On that same night, the Philistines, along with Rala, come to capture him, and this time, Samson can no longer defend himself like before. He is captured easily since he has become as weak as any other man, and Rala gouges out his eyes. Samson is then taken and thrown into a dungeon alongside his brother Caleb. In the dungeon, Samson apologizes to Caleb, admitting that he has failed again by following his own desires and actions. Back at home, Delilah cries in remorse for what she did to Samson. After a few days, Rala goes to Samson to force him to reveal the secret of his strength and how to attain it. Samson, however, insists that there is no secret, as it was God who granted him strength. He offers to kill Rolla since he has nothing to say, but instead, he is whipped. Later, Rolla speaks with his father and mentions that now all the peoples will fear them for what they did to Samson. However, his father calls him a fool for not killing Samson immediately. Rolla then kills the king and assumes his throne. Some days later, Delilah visits Samson in the dungeon and claims she has come to free him. Samson knows she received coins to betray him, but she pleads that Rolla deceived her. Samson forgives her on the condition that she secures Caleb's release as well. She manages to do so, and before Caleb leaves, Samson instructs him to gather men to attack the city. Despite his physical state, Samson feels that God is urging him to do something for his people. That now, for the first time in his life, he is listening to God's will and no longer his own. Caleb is then taken to be released, while Samson talks to God saying that he is now able to hear him, and asks to show him what to do. One day, the Philistines gather in the temple of Dagon to celebrate their new king. Rolla orders Samson to be brought in to be humiliated before everyone and to glorify their pagan god Dagon. After being beaten and humiliated, Samson prays to God for strength one last time to fulfill his purpose of beginning to liberate his people. He stands between the two main columns of the temple and begins pushing them with great force. Samson shakes the pillars, and eventually, he manages to topple them, causing the giant statue of Dagon to fall and the entire temple to collapse, killing everyone inside, including Samson. That day marks the beginning of the Hebrew people's liberation, and Samson is forever remembered as the man chosen by God to initiate it. Despite repeatedly straying from his purpose due to the lust of his eyes and pursuing his own selfish desires with women, Samson achieves redemption. In the end of his life, he defeats more enemies than during his entire lifetime, securing a new path for his people, who, inspired by his faith, unite and become a strong nation in the land until this day.